Good morning. Our reading today is called, How High Should We Aspire? Truth is one and eternal. Realize oneness with it in your deathless self within. The following commentary is based on the teachings of Paramahansa Yogananda. The passage this week is from the Gospel of St. Matthew, chapter 5. I say unto you, that except your righteousness shall exceed the righteousness of the scribes and the Pharisees, ye shall in no case enter into the kingdom of heaven. The easiest explanation for these words is that they were spoken in criticism of the scribes and the Pharisees, particularly since Jesus was often verbally attacked by them and stood up to them fearlessly. However, it wouldn't have been much of a challenge to the disciples who aspired to the spiritual perfection to tell them, don't be like those who lack any such aspiration. Jesus, in fact, says, only a few verses later, be ye therefore perfect, even as your Father which is in heaven is perfect. What Jesus was referring to here, then, was the self-righteousness of the priests. Don't seek perfection, he was saying to his disciples, in the image of your project toward others. Don't be satisfied with a goodness born merely of ego self-definitions. The highest virtue is to transcend the very thought of personal virtue in the realization of God alone as the doer. Before this realization, even the thought, I am kind or I am truthful, is self-limiting. As the Bhagavad Gita says in the 7th chapter, hard the wise Mahatma is to find, that man who saith, all is Vasudev. Thus, through the Holy Scripture, God has spoken to mankind.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our Sunday service. It's always a joy to share with you in this way, especially, online. It's wonderful. I first want to read from Master's book, Whispers from Eternity, which he calls Poems and Prayer Demands. I disconnected my awareness from the little garden plot of the senses and switched it to the vast territory of the infinite. The aurora of my awareness spread like dancing waves of light in the aurora borealis and embraced thy cosmic wonderland. When thus I entered that vast panorama, my awareness no longer dulled by the opiate of sensory noises, nor blindfolded by the veil of mere appearances, I stood marveling before, before countless streams of radiant, rushing thoughts, rippling through millennia from long dead, still living, and yet to be born civilization. All time, past, present, future, danced its infinitude of rhythms in the stage of my all-embracing consciousness. So this topic of how high should we aspire is one of those topics that on some level we resist to a certain degree. I'm going to explain myself, of course. Swamiji, Jyotish told this story. Swamiji, they were having lunch with Swamiji in India, Jyotish and Devi. And Jyotish said that Swami had been talking a lot about, in certain talks and conversations, about how we should presume, assume, affirm that we will be freed in this life, become a jivan mukta, which is a soul that recognizes, meaning realizes, its home is not here, it's not a physical being, it is a spiritual being like that. And that we must do this and not have a part of ourselves holding back and saying, well, I don't know if I'm not good enough. I'm not, I've done all the things that we do to excuse or even distance ourselves from that thought that we can be free in this life. And so Jyotish and Devi asked Swami, that's a very challenging thing to do, because you think you're being egotistical if you say, I'm going to be free in this life, or like that. So how do we do it? How do we find within ourselves the affirmation that we could be free, and still be based in reality, not be just making it up, not quite believing it. And Swamiji said, the spiritual life is essentially about understanding that God is the doer in every single part of reality, not just in your own life, but in all of reality. There would be no physical universe. You wouldn't exist, I wouldn't exist without God being at the core of every atom of creation. So God is the doer of it all, not you, not me, God. That's one. The other is getting out of ego consciousness, which will not do the work involved to know that God is the doer. The ego wants to change that reality and draw to itself. So the reality of who I am, the truth of who I am, when you say that to yourself, who am I? The answer is always a spiritual one. But we will say, I'm a woman, I'm a man, I'm Italian, I'm English, I'm German, I'm American, I'm whatever it is. And all of those definitions, as Swami defined the ego, a bundle of self-definitions, they keep that sense of who we really are at a distance from our truth. And that makes the ego comfortable. I think... what's his name? Eckhart told the story of, he's a spiritual writer. He's written many books, but he tells the story of when he came to his own with his spiritual life. He was suicidal, and he said, I was looking at myself and saying, I don't want to be with myself anymore. I just want to end everything. I'm not happy. I don't want to be here. And all of a sudden he said to himself, well, who's talking right now? I don't want to be with myself. I and myself, are those two different things? Is one of them different than the other? And if so, is one of them good and one of them bad? What is this conversation? Who is this conversation about? Who is it? The whole, his whole thought process took him off wishing to die into, wait, who am I? Who is saying, I don't want to be here and I don't want to be with myself? Which is myself? And it took him into a spiritual journey. And he wrote many books as a result of that. Another thing I remember reading was, I don't even know who it was, some sadhu in India who referred to his ego as ego-ji. In this book I was looking at, so sweet. He said, ego-ji loves drama. Ego-ji is always reacting. Ego-ji complains all the time, loves to complain. Ego-ji, so he goes on like this. And then he said, but I want to live with Soul-ji. And Soul-ji doesn't complain. Soul-ji doesn't take everything personally. In fact, he thinks of others, so he never takes anything personally. Soul-ji does not like drama. Soul-ji wants to be calm and kind, and on like that. It's a beautiful way of thinking of our two natures that really exist within us and within everyone else. Relate to Soul-ji. We have to realize that Ego-ji has a place. And it's very lovely to think of Ego-ji, because Ego-ji is just acting in its own reality. You know, that Maya is Maya, and Maya is delusion, and it identifies Ego-ji with Maya. That's its nature. But Soul-ji does not. She relates to spirit, to God behind appearances. So the whole point of this sadhu talking the way he did was to help us to see that we are always swinging between these two parts of ourselves. And when we are self-involved, when we're thinking of the self, we will tend to go with the ego, with ego-ji, and be, pulled down by it. But Soul-ji will always elevate our consciousness. The point here is to understand that whenever ego-ji is active within us, no matter how small that movement is, we are no longer identifying or thinking that we are on this journey to the highest. Any little hurts, this is Gyanamata. She said, we nurse to ourselves all the little slights and resentments and hurts, and all of those things are the drama of ego-ji. If we forget ourselves, and it doesn't mean, of course we don't forget ourselves. I mean, we wake up, we shower, we eat, we sleep. This is taking care of ourselves. So it's not like we don't do these things, but we don't have to give in to those little voices that constantly are chattering to us inside, and begin to listen to the depths of our soul. Because we are both. We identify significantly with the ego, but we are at the core of our being, in our true nature, we are spiritual beings first and foremost. And that's whenever we find ourselves thinking, something bothered me, that's the drama of ego-ji again. Change it, do something about it. The other thing is that we already have a definition from Master about how and what we should be doing, because Master, remember, defined self-realization is the knowing in all parts of your body, mind, and soul that you are now, not then, now in the possession of God. That God's omnipresence is your omnipresence, and that all we have to do is improve our knowing. Now, there's the rub, improve our knowing. But he's saying we're already in that presence. We already are a part of that presence. So how do we improve our knowing? Because this is the most important. Any time I want to say it again, I said it a few minutes ago, any time we are reacting, any time we are involved in the drama, any time we are complaining, any time we want to look at the negative in ourselves or others, any time we are doing those things, we are distancing ourselves from God. We are taking the lowest, not the highest route. This is not to judge us. This is not about judgment or feeling guilty. This is about knowing what to do. That is not the way. The drama of ego-g is not the way. And so what do we do in terms of knowing that we are taking the right road, that we are moving in the right direction? And of course, we have all of the beautiful teachings of Master to serve us, and all great teachers of the ages. There is consistency, there is a universality in how you do this. But our part is to really, really make the effort, not go to sleep. And again, think of how positively we say, oh, I won't be free in this life. That's not realistic. And think of how tentatively we say the opposite. I will be free. I will be free. I already have God. I just have to resist ego-g's directives and move over to soul-g's directions. You understand? Think of when we say affirmation, when it's something that we're struggling with, our affirmations tend to be weak. For instance, somebody that is an alcoholic who is trying not to drink is still thinking, I mean, every Alcoholics Anonymous meeting, you have to stand up and say, hi, my name is, I'm an alcoholic. It's an affirmation of that reality. But there's a point where that shifts. You always have to be aware that that's a possibility, but the power of it no longer governs you. You understand? You have moved into sobriety, into being sober. And so that begins to take hold. It's the same here. The soul, the spirit, God, the masters begin to take hold of us and our consciousness and pull us. And of course, we want to be pulled, so we're helping toward them. And we have to, with equal strength, with equal power, resist the pull and tug of the ego, of ego-g, and of Maya. So again, I ask, how do we improve our knowing? How do we change our mindset so that we live more in our soul nature? In Master's teachings, he gives us a broad foundation for what will serve us, what will help us the most. And of course, we have meditation, as the basis, because meditation, that activity, is helping us to tune in to spirit within us, to God within us, to our higher nature. All of that will pull us along toward Soulji, toward God, in a powerful way. So meditation is a foundational key part of this journey. Another thing is, and of course, it has to become a habit, meditation. In other words, you don't do it sometimes and not others. You always do it. Even if some days it's better than others or worse than others, you always do it anyway. And that the reason is you're creating, this is right action, right thinking. And meditation is the first right action that we do. So right attitude is another component of Master's teachings, and indeed of the teachings of Christ and other great men. Think of Buddha's Four Noble Truths and so on. The Ten Commandments in the Old Testament, the Sermon on the Mount in the New. All of these, the Patanjali's Yoga Sutras, they are all about how we should live our lives, to put them in the right direction toward finding God. And right thinking, right attitude, these are all components of whether we're focusing on ego-ji or soul-ji, that we be the monitors of our thoughts, be the monitors of our words, be the monitors of our actions, and avoid the things that are not in tune and aligned to the teachings of the ages about how we find God, how we come close, draw close to God. So right thinking and right attitude, of course, developing will, our energy and willpower is an all-important part, because that's how we sustain meditation and right thinking and right action and so forth, and right attitude. Because willpower helps us to keep with it, stay with it, and always think when you think of willpower, because Master in his teachings, he doesn't just talk about will, he talks about will, he talks about willpower, and he talks about willingness. And they're nuanced, they're delicately distinct from each other. Will is the fact that we have a way that we can be. And, doing anything takes an act of will. I can dream about painting a picture, painting a masterpiece, writing a book, traveling the world, having a beautiful garden. But if I only dream about it, nothing's going to happen. What has to happen next is my will is activated, and I begin to do what's necessary to continue. Willpower sustains that action, that journey, whatever it is. It's that keeps us going, keeps us strong. Willingness really helps us to sustain the journey, because willingness is, I want to do what's necessary to achieve this. I want to. That's a very distinct thing from I'm going to, or I'm going to. It's very different. When we love something, we will stay with it. When we, isn't it Christ said that, I always get it back to front, but it works both ways. Where your heart is, there your treasure is. Where your treasure is, there your heart is. When you love something, you will be with it, stay with it, continue with it. And of course, that is a very necessary component of the spiritual life. We don't do it some days and then not do it others. it is a demanding, excuse me, it's a demanding and challenging journey, and it goes on for life. And what keeps us, what holds us, what carries us along are these willpower, willingness. And hopefully it all becomes willingness, because that's the heart then is engaged. I'm in love and I want to continue that journey, this journey. So it's very hard to sustain even a day without these three: willpower, and willingness. I hope you understand that. But also that at different times we need different ones of them. Sometimes we need just the act of will. But sometimes we need, no, I got to use my willpower. You got to get on board here. You got to do this. And sometimes, oh, I can't wait to do this. That's when it becomes somewhat easier, of course. So think of the need and necessity, and they're profoundly important in Master's teachings. Very, very much so. Another component is thinking of, the reading that Kabir did on humility. Humility, self-honesty. Remember, Swamiji talked about self-honesty, self-awareness in the reading. And humility in all spiritual teachings is a very, very, very key quality to have on the spiritual path. And no surprise, that the first of the 7 deadly sins, pride, it will keep us away from many, many things. And I don't know if you have those in other languages, but this is English anyway. I'm talking to English speakers. But the 7 deadly sins are classic in most cultures, but they're a part of the Christian tradition. Things like gluttony and envy and pride, and I can't remember them all. But there is an equal virtue for every one of those. And so, of course, the opposing force for pride of any kind, spiritual pride can be as bad as any other kind of pride. But humility is the antidote, if you will, for that negative quality. And humility, as we heard, is not putting yourself down and not faking it. It's a real self-honesty, knowing who you are, and not needing to always be dramatic, like egogy that we were talking about before, be dramatic and everything's drama. No, humility is quiet, self-effacing, puts others first before me. Very, very, I think the amazing kind of secret of humility is, because it's easy to think of humility as soft, tender, in many ways somewhat weak, but it's the absolute opposite. It takes so much inner strength to step back, to take a step back. I remember many years ago being at a banquet in San Francisco, California. A teacher there, Dr. Mishra, was an Indian man, but he was an MD. He had invited Swamiji and some of us to come to his ashram for a meal. And so in the ashram, it was very much Indian style, and they had laid out butcher paper on the floor, and all the devotees, we all sat on the floor. And we were this way, there were the rows of us, and across the top were all the swamis and masters that Dr. Mishra had invited. And so there were maybe 6 or 7 spiritual teachers. I remember Baba Haridas, Dr. Mishra, a man called Swami Prabhananda. He was a musician, a cute, it's very I don't mean any disrespect when I say he was the cutest little man, all in white. He looked like a Sikh. Very, very sweet, Indian. Most of them were Indian. And he was very quiet, and I think he was a silent person. And then Swamiji, our Swamiji, was on the end. And I remember sitting while everybody's getting organized and looking at all these people, and they're very distinct one from the other. These lovely, they were all souls that had given their life to God. They were all a lot older than I was at the time. And you felt a presence, but they were so distinct from one another. Very, very different personalities. Baba Haridas looks like a little elf, tiny man, been in silence for 50 years. His eyes glowed like coals. He's famously said, when my guru told me to go into silence, I went into silence, and for the first 3 years I was angry. Can you imagine? Because his guru told him to do it. He didn't choose to do it. But he did it out of obedience to his guru. And he said he was angry for 3 years because he couldn't talk back, he couldn't answer back, he couldn't do anything. But you look into those eyes and you knew this man is done with anger. He has conquered anger. And it was very clear. So you have this little man beaming through these beautiful burning eyes at everyone. Dr. Mishra, a very, very extroverted, energetic, it was his ashram, come, sit, eat. He was just directing everything, very, very energetic, very outgoing. And then you had Swami Pranabananda, I'm pretty sure that was his name. He was the musician. He had 2 disciples with him, and every time they whispered something, they were trying to take care of him, they whispered. He was very abrupt. You couldn't hear what he said, but he would just very, very stern and serious. And then this little man I told you about, all in white, who couldn't speak any English, but he twinkled at everybody. And Swamiji, our Swamiji, Swami Kriyananda, I felt an amazing quality of humility to his presence. He was with all these people. He just sat very calmly with them. No sense of needing to do anything. Just a very humble presence. And knowing who he was and knowing what he has achieved and knowing, he could have been someone that wanted attention, not a bit of it, not a little taste of it. So humility, and in fact, in all of them, there was a sense of it, but it was the one thing I felt from Swamiji. The personality is different, but all of them shared this beautiful, childlike faith in God. And it radiated from them because they've given their lives to God. More than that, they have actively tried to draw God to themselves to God, and sharing that with others. And it was tangible. That, and it's very childlike, it's very trusting, and it's very humble. Their greatness, they didn't have to put it out, not in the least, but you felt it, and you were touched and uplifted by it. So humility is a very, very profound part of the spiritual journey that we need to nourish, need to really feed, and recognize its power and its strength for us. The other qualities that I wanted to, really bring out from Master's teachings are, because relating to humility, as Swamiji said in the reading of the affirmation, is self-honesty. And so this is a part of Master's suggestion that we introspect and that we know what is helping me spiritually, what is harming me spiritually. Again, not to judge, not to feel guilty, but just to know. Remember, this is improving our knowing. All we have to do, because we already have God, all we have to do is improve our knowing. So Master is saying to improve our knowing, we need to look at ourselves and recognize what has to be gone and what has to stay and what we have to nurture and what we have to starve, so to speak, to help us to move forward. It's very, very much a part of valuing that which will foster, nourish the reality of who I am in truth. Who are we? There's a famous little New Age cliche that we are spiritual beings having a human experience, not the other way around. We are spiritual, not human beings, spiritual beings having a human experience. It is a dream. The world is a dream. The personality is a dream. It is so temporary. It will not go with us when we pass on to the next life. Not the next life, the next world. That we move from body to body, or have moved from body to body. And when we drop the body, as Master says, when we move from the body at death, the body dies. The body is gone. It turns to dust. And with it, the personality. Our consciousness doesn't die, but the personality sure does. And what created this body in this particular life right now, all of that is gone. What stays is what you did about it. Think about that for a moment. If you have been hurt, who has not been hurt? If you have gone through tragedies, if you have been betrayed, it's part of the human condition. If you nurture that pain, it takes over. This is Ego-G's drama, and please believe me, I am not trivializing tragedy or pain or suffering. All human beings. And again, Gyanamata said in her book, God Alone, it is not the things that happen to us that is important. It is what we become through them that is important. So, triumph, tragedy, happiness, joy, pain, sorrow, sadness, blame, all of it disappears. Totally disappears. What does not disappear is what you did with those things. And that's why looking at this little checklist of the things that we need to overcome and to find our way toward God and self-realization is knowing that we have within our power to change one thing, how we respond to life. I mean, it is one thing, it's many things, but it's only one action every time. Change how you think, change how you speak, change how you act. This world is a dream trying to convince you of its reality. You are hurt, the drama of Ego-G. You are hurt and you have a right to be hurt. You are whatever it is, and you have a right to be. And that's true. There is truth to that. But it doesn't help us spiritually to stay with that. I can't remember the author, but one author, a spiritual author, said, "We are all woundologists. We love to share our wounds, whether they are emotional or physical, or we love to share wounds with each other. Share your energy and your vibration of faith and trusting God. That's what we should be doing. That's Soulji. So again, I remind you these things from the masters, telling us you are now in possession of God. This is not just a nice idea. This is not just a claim being made to cheer us on. Masters speak the truth. All we have to do is improve our knowing. How are we going to do that? When are we going to do that? And with what spirit will we do that? I don't know if people saw the movie Chariots of Fire. It won an Oscar, I think, in the 80s. But it was about two men in England, Cambridge University, and this is after World War I. It's like the 1924 maybe Olympics in Paris, in France. And these two men became part of the team from England that went to Paris to race. They were all runners. One of these men was Harold Abrams. They were well known and famous at the time. And the other man was Eric Liddell. Eric Liddell was a Scotsman, and Harold Abrams was a Jewish man. Both great runners. And in one scene, Harold, who is incredibly competitive and strong, and very, very defensive, with some rights about that, because he's Jewish and he's living in England and at a school that's very Christian, so he's very combative. But he runs a race. And he's very, very, he fights for everything he does. He puts a lot of energy and effort. And he runs a race and he loses. And he's sitting in the stands long after this is coming up to the Olympics. This is not in the Olympics. So he's sitting in the stands with his head in his hands. I lost. And his fiancée comes up. And she says, "Don't worry, there's always next time." And he looked at her and he said, "If I can't win, I won't run." And she looks right back and says, "If you don't run, you can't win." It's right back. And it's a part of our journey that if we give up, if we don't think we're worthy, nothing's going to happen. You have to run. And the other beautiful image with Eric, who is a very, very faithful Christian, very devout. He doesn't run for any other reason than he feels God's joy when he does. It's very beautiful. And so he says, he goes into a race, and this again is not at the Olympics, it's the heats coming up to the Olympics. He's running, and the field is crowded near him, and he gets knocked over. So it's not a dash, but it's a relatively short run, and so he's knocked over and falls down. And this has actually happened. This is not Hollywood making it more dramatic. This actually happened. He gets up and he just takes off running, and he wins the race. It is such a powerful moment. And of course, when he wins, he collapses. He just falls down. And he's, really, it's a little scary for a few moments. And a coach comes over and holds him up and says, give him air, step back. And he holds him up and he said, because when he ran, he didn't even look where he was going. His head falls back. there's no form, so to speak. And the coach says, that is not the prettiest race I've ever seen, Mr. Little, but it's certainly the bravest. That kind of spirit, that kind of willingness and willpower to finish the race. Because the last and final thing I want to mention is commitment. We have to commit to our spiritual journey and renew that commitment every day. Every single day. It takes all of these things to finish that journey and not become mediocre or mechanical or indifferent to what we're really doing here. Keep it alive, keep it fresh, keep it energized, and be devoted. Devotion, commitment. Commitment, devotion are the last two things I want to mention. I've already mentioned devotion when I said the heart, when it's engaged, will sustain us. And our sense of commitment and renewing it will keep us there. So God bless you all.